Well, thank you so much for joining today. My name is Carina De Vita. I'm one of the people behind the Teaching and Coaching Innovation SIG, and it's really great to see so many of you from really all over the world joining us today. Before we get started, we have a really great lineup of speakers, which I'm really excited about. I just wanted to use the opportunity to say a few words about what we have planned today, and also give John the opportunity to say a few words about the SIG. So John, do you want to share a little bit about the SIG, why people should join us and how they can do that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people. The SIG is basically a community of practice. We're all of us in different ways involved in trying to carry the message about innovation to students, to practitioners, lots of different contexts. But what we have in common is trying to understand how we could do that better. So it's very much about the how of teaching and coaching. And the great news is there's lots of good practice and a lot of emerging practices, especially around new approaches like today, and indeed things like AI. So there's a lot going on. We felt for a long time in ISPIM that we can benefit from sharing that. We had a great session in Tallinn, lots of workshops, lots of exchange. But basically, the idea of the SIG is to try and draw this community together and not just make it part of once a year, a meeting at a conference, but to have a series of activities running throughout the year. We have a newsletter, and if you haven't yet received it, please let us know and we'll sign you up for that. We have workshops and webinars like this one, and we're happy to do other things. We're exploring all sorts of things, including hopefully moving out into the physical domain as well. But yeah, we're really trying to make this a community practice and to share. So if you've got something to share, please let us know. If you'd like to join in and you haven't yet been formally linked in, please let us know and we'll put you on the mailing list. But looking forward to today. Thanks, Katerina.
Thank you, John. Today is a great opportunity to talk about teaching innovation, and doing that also showcasing some of our innovative practices. And I just want to use the opportunity to say a few words around, I guess, some of the current challenges that we're also experiencing as educators. I've come across a term that I thought was really fitting, and that was attention economy. We are operating in a so-called attention economy, and our attention can be scarce and it's a valuable commodity. And we see students that are actually confronted with many digital devices throughout their day, often also in the classroom. And that means there is a source of distraction that we're actually competing with. At the same time, the ongoing cost of living crisis also means for students that they're forced to choose between attending classes and earning a living. So the class time that we have with our students is even more precious. And that's why I think, amongst many other reasons, it's really timely and critical for us to think about how we can make teaching really engaging and use innovative methods to make knowledge stick and develop skills for the future of our students. And we use this platform, this online platform, to actually come together to promote innovative teaching. As a result of that, we want to provide a platform to share and demonstrate practices from all over the world, and do that in a very concise format so that we can also encourage reflection at the end when we have a panel and opportunities for Q&A. So for each of the three presentations that we will have today, we follow a very similar format. I'm asking our speakers to tell us a little bit about the teaching context. What's the institution like, the student body, and what is the module that they're referring to? The approach and the resources are really at the heart of what we're talking about. How do you make your teaching engaging and how it's innovative? And finally, why do you think it works? Why do you think what you present and what you do is effective? And these are some of the key ideas that we will hear about today. We have the opportunity to listen to 3 really great speakers. We have Carina Leue-Bensch from Hochschule Worms here, who's going to talk about design thinking. And then we hear from Riccardo De Vita from Manchester Metropolitan University, who's reflecting on his approach of using social network analysis. And finally, Carsten Neber from Rhine-Waal University of Applied Sciences will talk to us about rapid techniques for real-world problem solving in the classroom. And at the end, we have a bit more, I would say, than half an hour, roughly half an hour, to ask some questions about their practices, and anything that you pick up throughout the presentations can be discussed as part of our panel at the end. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the virtual screen to Carina, who's also supporting as a committee member our Teaching and Coaching Innovation SIG. Carina, over to you, design thinking. Let's hear more about it.
Thanks a lot, Katarina, and also thanks to John for giving the introduction, and also welcome from my end. Great to have you. Right, let me share some slides with you. As Katarina just mentioned, we have a certain structure that I'm going to follow. I've prepared some slides, but feel free to introduce me whenever you have any questions, or whenever you want to dive into some of the things more in detail. Right, so the teaching showcase, as you saw it in the title, was called Design Thinking Unleashed, Transforming Teaching with User-Centered Innovation. So it's not necessarily only about design thinking, but as you will see, design thinking is the method I'll be using, or I've been using a lot. Core is to involve the user in the thinking. So what's the context? Wait a second. There you go. So the context is my teaching at Hochschule Worms, as Katarina says, the university in Germany. The context I'm teaching in is General Program International Business Administration, where my responsibility is in the course on entrepreneurship. It's a master course with well, a diverse set of students. We have mostly students from all over the world, between 20 and let's say 40 students per course. And the content and context is mainly about corporate entrepreneurship and innovation management. So the question is, how is innovation going to happen in companies, small and medium companies, as well as large organizations? What I want to add is that the University of Applied Sciences, which means that we do work a lot with companies. So many of the courses, many of the challenges that I'm working with are really in collaboration with other companies from the region, but also across the regions, basically. The main lectures that I'll be giving are, as I said, in the context of corporate entrepreneurship. Courses are on creativity, on innovation management, marketing and management of innovation, as well as corporate entrepreneurship, which is all about how can mainly large organizations enable their enable the whole workforce to continuously innovate. So this is basically content-wise what I'm working with. All of those courses are challenge-driven, meaning that we'll work with companies, and the companies would come with a challenge, and then in a hands-on mode, we'll try to solve those challenges in collaborative formats, where we have workshops with companies together, or well, with everybody involved, like several partners involved, and we want to involve in solving the challenge. In general, there's a strong emphasis on user-centered innovation, ideation, prototyping and testing, and business modeling. So this all goes together with design thinking. So this is what the context is. And here you see 2 pictures of my courses where groups are working with the template that I'm going to share through. But what I also want to emphasize is that I'm not only using it in my courses or in my lectures, but actually I'm using the templates or the approach that I'm going to share with you in a very broad set of events or diverse contexts. So basically, I'm using it all the time when I want to shortly introduce the participants in the method of design thinking. So to generally explain, and not only explain, but really having people experience what design thinking is. I'm using it to kick off a course, even a whole semester. If we're working like a full semester on design thinking, I would use formats, one of the formats that I'm going to share with you, to have the students or for them to have an overview of what design thinking is and what they could expect in the upcoming 6 months. I'm also using it partly in the middle of the course as ideation session. So imagine we know about a certain challenge, now it's time to find ideas. As I said, I also use it as a standalone format to showcase the core principles of design thinking, or generally user-centered innovation. And this comes with diverse target groups. So my usual master courses on innovation. I'm also using the same templates for Kids University that we have once a year, where we have kids ages between 8 and 12, kids coming to the university to learn about what is going to happen at a university. So I'm using the same templates. Also using it for MINT program, where we have students ages 13 to 16. And as I said, I'm using it for company and university events with up to 70 participants from diverse company backgrounds and diverse levels within the company. And the template that I'm going to share with you today was actually the one that I've been using at conference. In this one, it was the last ISPIM conference, where we've used the same template as part of a workshop, but I'm also using it in diverse other, workshops and conferences. This was about the context. The resources that I've mentioned, the format that I'd like to share with you is, on the one hand, something that's called the Design Project Zero, or DP0, which is coming from the D School. You find the link on the slide. And the other format is something that's called the Design Dash, which a format based basically on the principles of the D School, but it was the former student Molly who actually adjusted this template for a slightly different context. So whereas the DP0, which you find here on the left-hand side, mainly works in pairs. So whatever cohort size you do have, you would work in pairs. You would separate your groups in, let's say, groups of 2. And they would work in pairs to interview each other and to get to know and, let's say, apply the whole principle of design thinking. The Design Dash is generally about similar messages and context, but this one's mainly working in several small groups. For example, you would divide your cohort, whatever size it is, in groups of, let's say, 6 participants, and then they would work together as a group. But both formats are about transferring the principles of user-centered design, of involving ideation and prototyping into your, let's say, teaching. What I want to share with you right now is actually the Design Dash template. If you see the slide, it's just one of the 2 that I'm focusing at right now. So this is called the Design Dash, which would start with the team members introducing each other, and basically you can combine this with any kind of warm-up experience that you want to bring in. What I'm doing here is that I have these participants join each other to break the ice, because this very often comes with a laughter, in the same way as we've been using it at the last ISPIM conference. Participants drawing each other, and then this way, let's say, kicking off the discussion, the get to know each other, then combined with introducing them based on the sketch. So now participants are ready. And they would work with this Design Dash template, which is a super fast participatory approach to design. In this case, we've designed the future campus. but you can basically use it, what you find here, you can basically have them rolling a dice or just give them a list of topics. If there's no specific topic you want to work with, you can basically use this as a kick-off. Just pick one of those topics the templates come along with, and have the participants working on one of these topics here. For example, ask for a number between 1 and 30, and imagine one of you says it's 25, and then the same challenge would be cleaning your house. So you would use the same template around the challenge of how to better clean your house. So in this case, as I said, it was about designing the future learning room or campus. And now that the participants know each other, they would share 3 ways they connect to the topic. Specifically in the context of the future campus, everybody has, let's say, different backgrounds, different expectations on what the future campus or how the future campus looks like. And this first part of that template is about sharing each and everyone's expectations in this regard. Everything comes with strong time boxing. So as the facilitator, you would try to have the whole thing done in, let's say, 60 minutes. But in the reflection, I'll come back to the point that this is absolutely scalable, and you can basically use it, as I said, as a kickoff in 60 minutes. But depending if you want to focus on rather the learning experience or the actual outcome, you could basically extend the whole thing up to workshops for a whole day. Anyhow, coming back to the process itself, now the team members know each other, and now they would talk to a user, and they would interview each other on the one hand at the table, or they would invite a user from the neighbor table, for example, from another group, and they would interview the user about his or her experience on, in this case, the future learning room. And once the interview is done, the team comes together and they would frame the team's perspective around this user problem, or how the user puts this challenge. And then you would here frame the persona around the user you've been talking to. So, for example, we've talked to this person, you draw a picture in an ideal case, and then you would focus on the core needs. This is what they need to, and here's what we actually think the underlying problem is. And you can combine this with a nickname to, put more emphasis on certain aspects of the persona. And then I've skipped one step in here. You would start firstly with drawing a solution together with the people on the table. And what I've done here is actually already adjusting the template. I've skipped the drawing and had the team immediately building a solution where you come up with some exemplary pictures. But basically, in this case, you could combine the drawing of an ideal campus with Lego blocks alongside. I'm going to share some of the outcomes soon. And once you've built that prototype, the template guides you into the direction of sharing that prototype with your user, and then ask them what do they think about what works and what does not work around their prototype, what are the questions they have, and what new ideas they could come up with. And then you would implement that feedback into your prototype to further improve it. So you would iteratively build on the solution. So here's some of the prototypes in the context of the campus I've been using in the last conference. So it really helped embracing a discussion around the different context of the future campus and the different things we need to consider when trying to redesign the campus or the learning rooms, to be prepared for the future learning. Some reflections. My own insights are that this template specifically, but also this DP0 template that I've been talking about, they are really, really highly adaptable for diverse user groups. So as you've seen, it works with a diverse set of ages. You, of course, can think of certain challenges. For example, if I'm working with the kids, I had the challenge to redesign their school bags. It was really live discussion going on within the groups of kids. But it also worked pretty well in combination of, as I said, the format we've been using was a workshop with several members of the university coming together with several members of companies from the region. And we've had several topics, including cybersecurity, which is really hard to grasp. But still, the workshop groups have easily found their way into prototyping, and they've been building cybersecurity prototypes, and it was really, really helpful to kick off this discussion. So diverse set of user groups, and also, as I said, a diverse timing from 60 minutes up to several days, where you could basically easily still use the same template and add it with other workshop tools and methods to scale the whole general approach up to several days or even a full week. But it's also highly adaptable in order to cater several key learnings, whether you want to deliver some general innovation messages in terms of innovation is important, whether you want to focus on the user focus, like if you want to be innovative, it's important to have the user in mind, which is the core message of design thinking and of this template specifically. Whether you want to focus on the importance of prototyping or on the importance of collaboration, so you could easily use that same templates and then add the reflection and ask for participants learnings, and then add it with some key messages you want to deliver all around those topics. How am I assessing it? On the one hand, in the courses, asking the students for individual learning reflections. So each and every student has to submit an individual learning reflection at the very end of the courses, which makes transparent if and how this method in collaboration or in companion with other tools is appropriate in delivering the things that I want to deliver. And on the other hand, I'm using the tool called ROTI, Return on Invested Time. If I'm working with companies or at workshops and sessions, basically they would share how relevant it was for them, followed by some keynotes and some key feedbacks on what their learning was. My key essence and the general feedback that I get upon this methodology is that it's really hands-on, that it's really engaging, it's really powerful in bridging gaps. And what I mean with gaps here is hierarchy gaps. For example, specifically in companies where you very often come across some, let's say, hierarchy barriers, but this doesn't play a role here. So you really have people from all ages and from all levels within the company, but also from diverse student cohorts coming together and discussing on the very same topic, no matter where they come from. But it's also very powerful from my perspective to close this relevance gap, as it's known in literature, which is the gap between science and practitioners, because this prototyping really helps you talk about something tangible, and it helps you to use the same words. And if you don't find the same words, you would have the same prototype in front of you, and you would discuss about what is already there and what might be added. And it really helps closing the gaps in terms of wording and different understandings of what science is talking about. and what is relevant for practice. So this was basically something that I got as a feedback, and I considered as really, really powerful. To add here, none of these tools are new, so they're therefore well. And if you have a look at the previous slide, the links are actually open for everyone's use. And yeah, this is what I wanted to share with you, that although it's therefore well, personally, I feel that it's still very, very relevant, and it really helps to engage a broad audience. That's it from my end.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carina. And I think that was a really great example of a bite-sized teaching demonstration where we get a sense of what you're doing in your practice. And I'm sure people have loads of follow-up questions. What I would say is hold those questions if you would like to pose them directly. If you want to share them in the chat, please do that, and I'll pick up those questions from the chat as part of our Q&A. Carina, thank you so much. We hear from you more during the panel, and in the meantime, I'll hand over the screen to Riccardo De Vita, who's going to talk about social network analysis in context of innovation management. Riccardo, the floor is yours.
So, well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invite. I'm delighted to be here. And indeed, I'm going to be talking about my experience of using social network analysis, which is the methodology I mainly use for research within the context of an innovation management module. So in this presentation, yes, I'll be talking about network analysis. I'm sure many of you know what it is about, but this is an example. It's a research method that allows to depict teams, organizations as a series of dots and lines, and based on that measure then quantitatively some properties of such structures. And there is quite a lot of studies, of course, in innovation management about this. I'm sure there's a lot of people doing this, and by all means, I'm not claiming that the way I teach this module is the way to do it. But I think there are some interesting learning, probably from my own experience, that I'd like to share with you today, specifically because of the nature of the context where I've been teaching. At the moment, I am in Manchester Metropolitan University, but until recently, I was at the University of Greenwich, and this is where actually the experience I'm sharing took place. And I'd like to focus on teaching network analysis innovation to a context where there is non-specialist audience, both staff and students, as well as using this approach to reach also other institutional objectives. So following a similar structure that Carina followed, start a bit with the context. Well, the University of Greenwich as the Center of Business Network Analysis as one of the primary research group there. And why is this relevant? Well, because then it became of importance for the institution to push an agenda of research-informed teaching. I'm sure this is something that many of us here today are familiar with, the idea to link and bridge the gap between teaching and research and making teaching a bit unique. Well, the University of Greenwich has the largest group of network analysts in the UK and in Europe applied to business, and there was an appetite to instill ideas from network analysis into our modules. At the same time, the university takes a lot of pride in the fact that it focuses on a widening participation group, so students that are new to university, the first in their family to go to university, not acquainted maybe to absorb dense research-informed notion and everything. So quite a challenge in terms of striking a balance. And what the literature of teaching suggests is that to meet the needs of these groups, it's important to localize the learning, making the learning more accessible and relevant for the personal experience of the students. So in that context, I contributed to some session to a module, which was titled Innovation in Competitive Environments, which, as you can see from some keywords highlighted in the aims, has an objective to be relatively practical. So focused on practices in terms of developing innovation thinking and management, introducing some practical tools and frameworks, and trigger a bit of creative thinking. This was taught to year 2 undergraduate students coming from different programs, all of them in the business school, but Some of them were students that had a clear interest in innovation, so coming from the Bachelor of Arts in Entrepreneurship and Innovation, but others instead more generalists, such as business management, or in a slightly tangent field, such as logistics. The module was delivered as a 1-hour lecture, followed by a 1-hour tutorial, and it tended to be pretty large, easily over 100 students in the most recent iteration, and actually even more. In that space, I was responsible for the delivery of 1 lecture and 1 tutorial, where to introduce students to network analysis. And because I was the only member of staff in the teaching team with familiarity in network analysis, I had to spend some time thinking about, okay, how can I facilitate also a group of other tutors, because the module is large, to deliver the same material, and how can I introduce students that never came across network analysis before to the idea without boring them to death or going too much into the technicalities. And I'll structure my approach along these 4 steps in my next slide. So something about the planning, something about the delivery of the lecture, then the delivery tutorials, and a bit of activities following the tutorials. So starting with my planning, well, the starting point was to keep the students warm and trying to interest them with something that, again, shouldn't be too methodological. So I shared a very accessible TED Talk talking about network analysis, and with a lot of very practical examples for them to look. But I also make it clear that I wanted to use their own data and their own experiences. So before my delivery, I share with them a network survey. I do have a bit of a picture here. It's a survey that I designed where I was asking students to map their interaction with other members of the classroom. And I would use later on the data collected in this way with them to demonstrate some of my points that I would have been using throughout the lecture. And there was also a lot of coordination with the teaching team in terms of the timing, understanding how we're going to be delivering this together, and to be sure for me as well that I could build on previous framework and notions that were introduced as part of the module. In a couple of cases, I also had a very quick introduction to those of my colleagues interested in knowing a bit more to network analysis to understand why I thought it was relevant to bring this in within the module. So once all these kind of things were done and students were informed and staff were informed, we then moved to the delivery of the lecture. A lecture that I had basically 3 main things. The first thing is trying to introduce why we should bother about networks and why was it relevant. And I started talking not just about innovation, but I started talking about epidemiology, social network sites, terrorist attack, or football matches, and try to say that actually networks are a bit everywhere. And if that's the case, then innovation shouldn't be any different. And then, especially to trigger curiosity at the beginning, I often try to use example of counterintuitive ideas or challenging their own view. For example, showing the comparison as it is here between a formal organizational structure and informal one to identify what are the important people in a team, or discussing their own biases and showing to them that actually we do have biases when we network with other people. For example, we go to people that are similar to us, and asking them to think of how this is going to be having an impact on innovation. So once I manage to get a bit of interest, starting very gently, I will then introduce some basic network theories. These are pictures from my slides. I, of course, don't want to go through them here today. But the idea was to try to link innovation theories and network theories all along. And this required a lot of work with the module leader to be sure that I could map and scaffold the learning properly. If I wouldn't come in without connecting any previous session, just delivering my talk, students would have been probably lost. And instead, I was trying to connect on the way backward, trying to say, okay, you covered this a few weeks ago. This is another way to look at this phenomenon. This is a way we can interpret this theory, but also in terms of connecting forward, for example, linking this I was talking about with their own assignment. Again, the idea of making this relevant straight away for the students was particularly important. And of course, I need to stay away, despite my natural inclination, as much as possible to any technical details, any mathematics, because that was not the point. My objective here was to trigger an appetite and making myself available in case for later discussion. And the third point I tried to make in the lecture was to have a lot of examples around several organizational issues affecting your organization. For example, collaboration overload, so why some people don't contribute as much as they should. in an innovative process? Well, because they're overloaded and they're expert and everybody goes to them, and how we can use network analysis to mitigate that. So I had an example of a restructure in an organization and delayering, or a very practical solution that some other organization implement to promote networking. For example, throwing a party with tags and badges that people were wearing to signal them with whom they should have been talking to, exchange good ideas, and so on. And I try to make it relevant, showing that actually this is something that maybe could have used in the workplace. So this was my first hour with the students. I go away and I finish my lecture. And after that, I deliver the tutorial. In between, there is a bit of an intermezzo, an interludio, where I do analyze the data of the survey that I collected with the students. And I produce some analysis. As I mentioned, this was a relatively large model where we had in the last iteration probably something like 5 or 6 tutors, if I remember correctly, and not all of them are familiar with network analysis. So to ensure scalability and to be sure that this module and this session could have been a large group, the idea we came up with was actually to have the tutorial structure around an interview. So I was interviewed by the module leader with a bunch of guiding questions, and these questions were then used in front of the student. First, they were just posed to the student. The student were working in small group trying to find their own answer. And then my answer as the interviewee were played in front of the classroom and to compare notes and exchange ideas. So it was the tutorial was delivered as a sequence of very short video, which basically was me being interviewed, with group activities and the tutor facilitating. And all along the way, students were looking at their own data. For example, this one here, this is a group of one specific tutorial where the little dots are each students that answered the survey. And we started asking them, why do you think you exchange ideas with other students in the group? And we had competing ideas. Could have been based on gender, it could have been based on the performance. We measure a bit of their personality, maybe their extroversion. Actually, what came about is the fact that students just ask people they spend time with because they are in the same program of study, and there are much more barriers to go and talk to somebody that they're not familiar with because they don't see every day in the classroom. Which, of course, in terms of innovation means that there is a bit of potential in terms of missing opportunities, because maybe there is somebody very creative studying something else, maybe come from different countries, such as the blue students here that are Erasmus students that we don't feel comfortable going and ask questions to, and we stick to our own friends. And so in this way, we basically presented the idea, and then we unpacked all the data step by step with the students, exploring different assumptions, hypotheses. And initially, it was really about who do you go to speak about study-related matters, who do you go to seek advice when you study, and so on. But then we had a final question, which was, okay, suppose that this is your team and you are the head of the innovation unit within a multinational company. What do you think are the pros and cons of this structure? Do you see some insularity? Do you think problems of redundancy? Do you think people that can be overloaded? So we then abstracted out away from the data that and what they really were, but we used what we collected to allow students to reflect on what could be a potential team for this. A bit of a digression here. I mean, this was a tutorial only. In the past, I used to use a whole module around this, and so it was 12 weeks teaching, all using network analysis. In those cases, I was asking students to actually do analysis themselves, and it was great because John was talking about the issue of AI and so on. Well, it was great to avoid issue of plagiarism because every year I got a unique data set. It was based around the students. It was their own data answering the survey. It was impossible for them to really then come up with something that was standard off the shelf to be used for their own assignment. So it was very creative, and actually students really enjoyed that. As I said, there was also a bit of a follow-up activities. Well, obviously a lot of discussion with the team, but in order to incentivize students taking part in the survey, we also had a bit of a lucky draw, and some students that completed the surveys were given an opportunity. I don't know if it was really a reward or a punishment, but to have a chat with me for half an hour for one-to-one, what I called a network coaching session. So basically, I look at their own networks and I ask them to give me a few more data. And we had a conversation about what was the networking style of these students, if there was any biases. So for example, this student talking about study-related matters had a very strong preference to face-to-face. I said, this is great because it's deeper conversation, but maybe you miss out on other conversation. We look at the structure of these individual students and which were the sources of advice. And try to come up together with potential ideas in terms of changing on behavior and so on. And it was interesting, I think, for both for myself as well for the students taking part in that. So concluding with a bit of personal reflection, well, I think it went well, nonetheless, for the fact that I was repeatedly invited to deliver the session. So it means I did something good in the end. But also looking at the student feedback and overall at the perception of the class, this was overall well received, because the idea that the data were relatable, it was about them, it was something a bit different, was really, really good. And actually, the students said, wow, I never thought about me having my connection in this way and actually how this impacted my behavior. So for some of them, it was a bit of an eureka moment. But interesting enough, and again, maybe this is something that other people here could relate to, in a serendipitous way, without me really planning for that, this approach and this module, when I had a whole module about it, got a lot of interest from the overall institution. On the one hand, because it was a good way to deliver research-informed teaching. Again, the University of Venice wanted to stand out for a specific way of teaching, and that was one way to gently embed our own research expertise into our teaching. But also, because I was looking at networking of students and what they were doing to get ideas, maybe secure a job and so on, was actually showcased as a good practice to discuss embedding employability in the curriculum, which again is one of the big priority for a university, especially a university with a profile like the University of Greenwich. So I was ticking multiple boxes unintentionally almost by this approach, and I was asked then to share the way I was doing, and the fact that we was using data about students was seen crucial in that respect. Needless to say, it was very good to discuss different topics in innovation management. So I was good in working with the colleagues to connect to different things. It could be the diffusion of innovation, systems, theories, and innovation, but also the idea journey and how networks evolve over the creativity phases. So all went well. Admittedly, there were a few challenges. On the one hand, it really depends on technical expertise. So there should be somebody at least available. And the first year I delivered this session, it was only me running the tutorial, so it was easy. But then when we had more tutors, we need to come up with this idea of the interview recorded to be played in chunks in the tutorial to make it a bit more scalable, but we found a solution. It depends and it relies on student completing the survey. And we know that sometimes students don't really want to engage with some activity. So hence why we also put a bit of an incentive there, but the higher the response rate, the more meaningful the data. And it was just an introduction. More advanced topics needed to be explored further. And I finished my session with recommendation for other topics, recommendation for further reading. And some students reached out afterward to discuss those, but of course it was not for everybody. And of course, these are data about students. So careful need to be the approach in which data are presented and handled, because at the end of the day, we must protect anonymity. So I think I didn't really check my timing, but I think it's almost up. So I hope it was somehow useful and relevant. At the end of the seminar, I said, as Carina was already saying, we're going to be having questions, happy to take more, but also feel free to reach out. This is something I'm very passionate about, even outside. Here's my email, facilitated within ISPIM or even beyond. And it would be nice to compare notes. If somebody's doing something similar or want to do something similar, more than happy to talk and see maybe how different programs experience this, so different subjects of study, different institutions, different countries, because of course, networks are also affected by culture. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Riccardo. I think that was an excellent example of research-informed teaching, and not just using this as a phrase, but really seeing how that can look in practice. And I think the relevance to students' own data is also really appealing and makes it really interesting for them. So thanks for sharing your practice. I'm handing over the screen now to Carsten Neber, who's going to talk about rapid techniques for real-world problem solving in the classroom, sprint into innovation. I'm curious, Carsten, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for the opportunity to give some inspiration into innovation in teaching. Just as a little bit of background, you don't have to read this. This is something you can find on LinkedIn. I'm a computer scientist. I'm a professor since 2011. I'm really passionate about human-centered design, innovation, finding, and so on. And I'm head of a program of a study of a course at our university, Hochschule Rhein-Waal, which is situated in Germany, close to the Dutch border. So whenever you come by, across by to see the sea in the Netherlands, just pass by and let me know. We are located here right close to the border in Kamp Lintfort. So but a bit of context to the program. It's a master's program on usability engineering. So that means it's all about how to make students aware of being the advocate for the user in the company later on. How to align the company. So we give them like the tools, the opportunities, the methodology to change company thinking and practice, aligning the company to become human-centered. So whatever they do should aim for the user needs in some way. So this master's program, currently we have 60 students, which is quite a lot. And I come back to this a little later. And it's taught in English completely. So again, just as a bit of background, because innovation is a driver in many businesses, and it's also a driver in our study program, made it a bit larger for the readability. So we have various courses in our semesters, first and second semester. In total, it's just a 3 semesters program. As I said, it's all about being the advocate for the user. And there is user experience design. Of course, anything that you design should be human-centered, but it should also be innovative in some way. We have digital fabrication for human interface design. You want to make something physical that is innovative. So innovation has a flavor in all of our programs, or all of our courses, I can say. And Carina, you know it better than I do, because she was teaching one of our courses, Innovation and Design Thinking. So innovation is a driver, and the question is how to make the students aware of that. So what I do since 2015, even to be honest, a little earlier. So this book is from Jake Knapp. It's a nice book. It's really, really great, and it describes the method I'm going to explain just briefly. It's about creating big ideas in just a very few days. So one of the key quotes is the most products fail in the market because they are insufficient. They don't have the market fit and they don't address or solve a specific problem of the user. So how to deal with that? The sprint methodology aims for building and testing a prototype in only 5 days. Super intense, super, intense course, but it works. As a quick summary and executor summary, so to say. The design sprint is one method out of the repertoire of design thinking, you can say, to test critical hypotheses of a customer's perspective. It takes 5 days. It is worldwide applied, following just this simple book, so to say. It incorporates the mindset of design thinking, as I said. It's a customer or user-centric approach. Includes various techniques of design thinking, so to say. And it requires a facilitator, which is my task in that classroom setting here, and a decider to make decisions. You want to make decisions, you have to be quick and fast. And a sprint usually consists of a team of 5 to 7 people. Remember this, I will come back to that. So that's the idea of the sprint. So you have a challenge, you are going to address this challenge throughout 5 days, and at the end you have a great learning. So very quickly, on the first day, you have to define the goal. You have to create common understanding of what you want to achieve. What do you want to address? What is the problem that you would like to tackle? That's the most important thing of the whole sprint, I would say. There's lots of techniques, methods that you apply in order to achieve this. And at the end of the day, you have something like a story map that lists the customer, explains the customer's stakeholders in the process and the goal you would like to achieve and the most relevant activities in that process. Because you don't know everything, you involve customers, you involve experts, you do call specific experts for the field of expertise that you're looking for. Then you collect all the information. So everybody is listening to this interview, to this expert interview, and is collecting ideas from different perspectives. So it's bringing together ideas. It's the design thinking approach, opening the space, getting everything that you know but then at some time you have to come back to some focus point, which you do at the end of the day. You have to pick a target. You say, this is it. This is the key aspect. This is the key idea we are going to tackle. So on the second day, it's all about sketching. There's many ways, many things that you do. It's well documented and structured of how to proceed and how to create solutions of different perspectives. You're exploring ideas. You decide which one is the relevant one. Third day is about decision making. Means every time, I mean, we know this from daily meetings, I have an idea and I have an idea. So you start discussing. In the design sprint, there's no way for discussion. It's all about inspiration. So you get inspired, but you have to make decisions. So you have to decide which is the most promising approaches to tackle the vision that you have endeavored on the very first day. So this is how it looks in the classroom setting. Lots of ideas and concepts stick to the wall, and you see all this sticky notes with questions and the dot votes with the most promising ideas driven by the participants. So at some point, you have to make a final decision. So according to the concept of design thinking, think of the diamond style, so to say. You have to focus. You have to say, this is what we're going to do. And you need to have someone that is going to do this. It's usually the role of the decider. Then you make a detailed storyboard. So you create a good story to tell because you want to test the product on the very last day. Then one day is only dedicated to prototyping. So you can imagine, the pressure that you have. There's just one day left, and you have to create a vision that can be told and shown to your users or customer. So what is about to creating a realistic facade, something that gives the users, the customer, an impression about how the solution would look like. So it could be Figma, PowerPoint, Keynote style, whatever. It could be even a physical product if you want. You can design even physical products and maybe use 3D scanning, printing, and other techniques in order to make it. Could be also like a video for a marketing concept. Anything is possible. Anything can be a prototype. However, as long as it is your minimal viable product to communicate the concept. So it's about sketching, it's about designing, and then at the end, it has to be something that feels real enough to test. It's not paper prototyping, okay? So it's really something that feels real. And then you are going to test it. Testing takes place with real customers, and you do the invitation for the customer on Monday already. So on Monday, you invite the customer for Friday. So there's a very intense or like pressure onto the team, let's say the team. And then while the interviewee is interviewing and presenting the solution, the team is observing and getting insights. And because you want to learn whether you're on track, whether the decisions that you've made were the right ones, and so on. The great thing about the sprint is in only 5 days, by the end of the sprint, you know how to proceed, what you did right, what you might have done wrong, what needs to be changed. And this is the great benefit of that sprint methodology. Okay, so as I said, it's all in the book, more or less. I mean, I did it, I don't know how many times. I have lots of practical experience. I know to adapt according to situations. And the teaching context is one of the situations. How to deal with not only 5 or 6 participants in the design sprint, but with 60. So this is something I've shared on Medium. There's some Medium reports, for example, on how to tackle this in a classroom setting. We did some changes to the methodology, and I'm also willing to share this with you whenever you approach me. So the biggest key for us at our university, not just in this course, but within many courses, is we are always using real customers. We have customers involved. So even these 1 week sprint is driven by a real customer's challenge. So we have the customer on site, being part of the process, being the decider. So you can imagine what this creates in the classroom setting. It's a lot of pressure for the students because they want to deliver. They have to deliver. They have to be serious. And this is a learning from a long time journey, I would say. So whenever you create your courses, your teaching concepts, aligned with some seriosity, maybe driven by someone external, that's always a game changer. Okay, so you get high quality at the end. This is the setting. This is 50 students, not 60 this time, but 50 students. And as I said, you have to adapt. You have to be flexible in applying these methods, but it's possible. And I would like to encourage you to make use of that. It's a great way to teach innovation. So what did the students learn by all of this? Of course, a new method, another method, but one which they have trained and practiced so that they can instantly apply it in their future career. Because due to the fact that we have a customer focus onto that, they had to deliver, they had to make it. It's not just a fictional scenario, something real. Of course, it's not classical human-centered design. Carina and I, we had a discussion on that, but it is a customer-centric view that has user aspects implemented as well. But it's a great way to cut off long discussions of whether something is useful or not, valuable or not. It's really a way to test it, and this is really amazing. Of course, the students learn a lot about time boxing and agility. Even I have to learn how to deal with this in an agile way. So whether I have 6 or 60 participants. But for the students, of course, working on this time pressure is really something they gain from. So that's what I've said. So I can just encourage you to do your own sprint. It's really an amazing experience. And whenever you have questions on that, just let me know.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carsten. I think that was a really great demonstration. Loved all the pictures. Almost felt I was there. So whilst people gather their thoughts around questions that they may have to our speakers, I have a couple of questions for the three of you. Maybe to kick off with one around the tailoring of your teaching methods to fit the specific context of your cohort or your university. What do you do if you have to deliver those sessions maybe to undergrad or postgraduate students or professionals or even in an online setting? Is what you've described suitable, or how do you make it suitable? I guess a question to the three of you. I don't know who wants to start. Carsten, you seem to have the microphone. So do you want to share with us any thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this specific method we've done in an online setting during the pandemic crisis, of course. And just keep your eyes open. I mean, there's so many resources in the internet. Many people did supply and provide templates for doing the design sprint, for example, as an online format. So it does work. It requires a bit of agility and flexibility, of course, but you can adapt to this. I guess we have learned a lot on how to deal with this circumstance of not being on site. It works. However, it's much easier and recommended to do this in presence. I've only done this in the context of teaching with my master's students so far, but as it is a well-described standard method, which you simply just have to follow, you can easily do it also in the context of bachelor students without any problems.
Excellent. I go in reverse order. Riccardo, any thoughts around adapting your methods depending on the context? How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, first of all, I would agree with Carsten the idea of keep your eyes open, because again, in all our field, I'm sure there is a community of people using the SPRING methodology, and as much as people talking about teaching in social network analysis, and there are ideas on how to tailor it. Because of the approach here, I don't think the online offline divide is so relevant, but maybe the level of study could be a different discriminant. Then maybe because behind that there is specific also research methodologies, the flavor, I mean, when I teach undergrad versus postgrad or even PhD student on similar topic, but is the emphasis then I put on the methods, because this is where, I mean, from undergraduate students, I think it's enough probably to get their curiosity and tell them that there is something more they want to study, is not often in the curriculum, and they can, if they're willing to maybe try to pilot it out through a dissertation and with a bit of one-to-one supervision. For postgraduate, you can expect them to run some analysis maybe, and you can expect them to be a bit more independent in collecting their own data. Well, of course, PhD student, the rigor on the method. So is the level of independence in engaging with the literature that you then balance with teaching the real methods, that would be the mix that changes my approach across levels.
And maybe to throw in another keyword, professionals. You have experience working with professionals on that topic. How do you go about training them on network analysis? Do you use different teaching techniques to get them acquainted?
Well, I mean, that is probably the reverse problem, is bringing much more back to the practical side. And I really started with a problem. I go in listening mode much more, and it is important to do something that is really an issue. So if there is a group or a company that is struggling to get teams working together, let's say two different departments that don't speak to each other, or if there is an issue of overflow of communication and problems being stuck there and not addressed because everybody emails too much or whatever, then I think it starts from really listening and understanding what is the real problem, and then designing a program that could be very similar, but actually then it's all flavored, trying to understand what is the real issue that they're facing. So it goes back somehow to my very first slide, to the making learning relevant and localized.
Excellent. Thank you. Carina, any thought on your template? You've mentioned children to university students. What do you do differently in those contexts?
Well, basically, I'm actually using the very same templates, but the differences probably are the topics. I mean, you always would choose topics the participants can connect with. And most likely, if we have something like cybersecurity, obviously, it's nothing that I would use work with kids at the age of 8. That's, I guess, more or less obvious. So you do have huge settings and huge options to choose the topics you're working with. What I've learned by doing is also that some steps as part of the template, like in specifically phrasing the problem, is really, really hard at some, let's say, ages or without any previous background in how to involve users. So I would actually skip those, and for example, without necessarily framing a problem or phrasing a problem, jump directly from understanding or having the user in front of you, and let's say sketching the user, and directly jump towards the next step, which is then collecting ideas in order to make the user happy. So this is something that you can play a lot with to skip some of the steps. Or on the other way around, to add more in-depth information and some steps if you feel like participants may need more explanations. For example, for the students, obviously I'm throwing in more theoretical terms and also giving them links to additional sources and links to in-depth readings. For participants in the practical setting, I would skip the theory at all and would just ask them what they've learned and how relevant they would think as these kind of things would help them in their practice, and try to emphasize this even more. So there's a lot of different things you can play around with.
Right. One question that I've also been discussing during our ISPIM workshop this summer was around how to land with the ultimate seminar design. And I described in my own practice a little bit the prototyping of how I landed with my seminar design, and that was based on some of the challenges I had encountered and the things that I had tried. So I guess the same question for you here. What are the challenges that you may have experienced possibly in earlier versions of what you are delivering now as your seminar design? What are the challenges, and how did you, I guess, prototype and refine maybe your approach, if you have done that? Carina, do you want to start as you're here?
I guess this is hack the tools is something that I've learned by learning by doing, basically. And when I started, I was really happy to find tools like this, which gave me a perfect guidance if you're like unfamiliar with certain topics or tools. It's perfect to have a book like Carsten mentioned, or to have the templates that I found online. It was perfect for me to get things started and to know what to do without knowing it prior. But when I started, I was actually using the template as it is, because I thought this is what it has to be, and this is what other people have learned already. And as I went, I felt myself being more comfortable with one step, less comfortable with the other. And I also felt the participants being more comfortable with one step and less with some others. And this is what I've learned now. And I guess meanwhile, I'm way more agile. What Carsten has also mentioned, way more agile in hacking the tools. And I'm also way more flexible in also within the workshop to let things go, or within the workshop to add some things out of the back of my head, because I have been applying it a lot. So it feels way more comfortable the more often you do it. But this means for me, you don't have to be perfect. So just give it a try, just start doing it. And I mean, it's never perfect. You just will have to flexibly react to what the participants need in this setting.
Right. I think the keywords I'm taking away here is agility, but also a bit of incremental innovation when it comes to starting off. I think that's fantastic. Carsten, you had some thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So my biggest learning is just to be brave, and just try. I mean, there's no perfectionism, of course, in a teaching environment, I would say. You will build up confidence by just doing, and maybe it's not 100% correct at the end, but there's some learning. And I experience due to several courses that after a while, so you start with something very rudimentary, and then you did it once and you know how to improve, and then next time you make it better, and then you encounter some other flavors, you like the number of participants, so how to deal with that. So you have to adapt the methods. So I mean, a couple of times I just showed the book. I said, it's in there. Yeah, it's in there. So for the perfect setting, it's all in here. Due to experience that you gain, due to practical experience, you get the ability to adapt. And this is something you should never lose. And you should make it, a positive thinking of that. It's the innovation of innovation at the end. So just be brave. There's a learning curve. And even if you start with something really basic and rudimentary, it might end up in something really great.
Excellent. Riccardo, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, of course, I agree with the idea of agility. That's something that I think is a beautiful word to encapsulate. And there is no perfect session. I mean, every time you need to adjust. One other dimension maybe I will consider in my experience is also being agile with respect to the external environment. I mean, sometimes you need to create awareness of what are your needs to the timetabling team, if you need a room with a specific layout. Sometimes to be sure that the software is installed at the right machine. And I have to say that maybe initially I was naive enough because I didn't articulate my needs correctly. And I thought, oh, it's going to be easy to be fixed. So the basic checks and being able to work and having a plan B. When I started teaching at to my students, I remember the task was for students to download their own Facebook or LinkedIn network. I remember with panic when I was about to start my module and realized that Facebook now changed the privacy setting and you were not allowed anymore to download your own data. We're going back in the days. So what's the plan B? So being agile also in terms of preparing for contingency and coping with the institutional environment within the institution and a bit outside, I think is fundamental, because some of the things we are discussing about have a bit of a requirement when it comes to resourcing and everything.
Right. And Riccardo, as you're here, I'm also wondering around another question that you alluded to in your talk, which is around managing teaching teams. And you all talked about your experience using particular techniques, templates, or methodologies. So how do you manage teaching teams that maybe don't have the same technical expertise? What are your tips there?
I mean, I think it was Carsten saying, be brave. It's about giving the confidence to the team. At the end of the day, we are all teachers, we are all educators. We do have it in us, the passion and the skill to deliver a message. Of course, if I am in charge of a module, it is my responsibility to make sure that everybody is equipped with the right skills and everything. So it could be through training and everything. But the most important thing, especially when dealing with, well, at least for this type of module, often I had junior graduate teaching assistant, let's say PhD students and everything helping out, is instilling that level of confidence and look, you can do it. I mean, we work together, constant debriefing and constant conversation, maybe at the first few sessions having an observation and a bit of feedback. But the technical side is that we are lucky in our job to be surrounded by very smart people. And so people can pick it up easily. I think it's more not the technical bit, but the capacity to be brave and even go outside the usual domain of comfort. That is the important bit.
Okay, great. Carsten, any other tips that you'd like to share? Are you working with a teaching team on this particular module?
Not really a team. I mean, I'm in exchange with other experts that apply this method. I also apply this method and others, of course, in industry. And so I get new insights from that perspective. So, for example, the ideal sprint is 5 days in a row, 5 to 7 participants. But in industry, it's super hard to get 5 to 7 people in one room for 1 week. It's almost impossible, so you have to adapt. So you learn how to deal with the circumstances and you exchange with other experts or the industry that you work for. Is it possible to do this in only 3 days maybe? So you adapt the method at all in general, you know? You have to decide, okay, which of the steps in between can be shortened, which of the steps might be replaced by some other methods with the same outcome. And this is something I try and do and discuss with other experts. And of course, reflection is important. So at the end, you have to ask, okay, did it went well? You know, you have to ask yourself, but maybe you have to ask someone else as well.
Excellent. That's definitely a good advice to think about the different perspectives in which you can also gather feedback. Carina, any thoughts? Are you working with a teaching team? Is it challenging or are you on your own?
No, for this specific method, I mean, the template that I was showing basically links to 1 hour workshop. So, and I'm not working with a teaching team in this connection, but if I'm applying that same principle in larger workshops, as I said, the last one worked with around 70 people from diverse companies. And they were, let's say, put into teams with students from the university as well as lecturers. So it was a mix of participants per group. And what I've learned here, it really helps to pre-brief some promoters up front. So, I mean, this principle and this method really lives with being fast-paced, so strong time boxing and prototyping using material you probably have been using for a couple of years now, after kindergarten, probably, and not everybody feels comfortable in doing so. But it really has to have some promoters on each table, knowing what will come and being aware of not everybody might feel comfortable, but you know, closing this gap of comfort level and maybe taking extra time to for onboarding, for explaining some of the other things. So if I'm working in large groups, I would still be the main facilitator for the method. But I would probably have a promoter sitting on each of the tables or standing in each of the teams knowing that I can also see and read their eyes if something would not work and extra support might be needed. So this is something that I felt really, really helpful.
That's very useful advice. And from working with Lego, I completely understand, and it resonates also with my experience. I can see that Bill had a question in the chat. Bill, has it been addressed? Do you want to ask that to our panel?
Well, hi, everybody. Firstly, fantastic talks. Thank you. Riccardo has given a lovely answer there. Maybe you could talk to it. I was just conscious that we all love teaching, and then we have to get to the assessment bit, consolidating the learning and giving people badges, because we work in universities. That's what we have to do. So I wanted to move from the excitement of the sessions to some of that practicality. So Riccardo, if you could build on your comments, and again, it'd be lovely to hear from Carina and Carsten as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill, for the question. And actually, thank you for the opportunity, because surprisingly, assessment remains exciting for me too. Because, I mean, the experience I have for this is, I have two examples. The first one is when I focus more on teaching how to manage a team. So I give students a real data set, which could be the classroom data set that we build together or something that I found out. And I ask them to analyze it using network analysis. Of course, this applies when I have more time. If I do a one-off guest lecturing, no, it wouldn't be possible. But if I have more time and introduce them to the software and the tools, I ask them to interpret it, ask them to really come up with idea. And I focus a lot on, think about recommendation. What would you do? Would you, I don't know, change office layout rather than throwing a networking event, or change the onboarding strategy for the firms? And students, well, I'll go back to this in a second. The other thing that I did, which was equally rewarding, I do have a slightly different survey, which is more based around individuals. And I asked students to complete a survey about themselves and ask them to come up with names of people around and what they use for and everything. And it's more a reflective piece, when then I ask them to produce their own map and tell me, what are your tendencies when you behave, when you network with others, and so on. And what do you see, how you connect this with some of the theories we discussed between innovation and sociology and so on. And again, students really like it. And there is something is exciting, because you don't ever read two coursework that are the same. And that, I think, what I don't like about marking is that after a while, if you have a traditional essay, can be repetitive. It is not the case. One thing I want to say, and then I leave the floor to colleagues, is that is a bit different. And the result is that my average remained the same, but standard deviation increased. So there are students that love it and students that hate it because it's a bit not standard. And therefore, you see probably a bit more polarization of the mark. The students do really very well. They get on, they embrace it, they get passionate. And if some of them maybe struggle with technicality or they don't understand the point, then less engaged. And so that's my experience with assessment. But from a personal one, is a bit more rewarding, I have to say.
Win-win.
Carina, any thoughts around assessment? Are you building this into your assessment somehow?
Well, again, it's not a standalone format, so I'm not assessing the outcome of this specific part of the course. But the course generally where this exercise would be embedded is assessed as a project work. So again, it comes with a real challenge from real companies. So the grading is all around project assessment, which, well, you find a lot of rubrics online. Meanwhile, luckily, it helped me a lot. So a lot of rubrics, and actually I'm mixing and matching existing rubrics, how to assess project-related work. Which mainly is about content, methodology, and creativity and own contribution. So let's say these are the main three keywords, going into some more depth using this specific rubric for grading. But I'm not only grading the project work of a team, but I'm also want to, let's say, emphasize, of course, on individual contributions. So it all comes along with individual reflections that the students would write, where they reflect on their own contributions. I would have the peers assessing their peers, because as part of the course, I would not necessarily see whether or not in their, let's say, project work, everybody contributed equally. So I'm really reaching out to the student to hear more on this. So it's a mix of project team grade and individual contribution, whereas the individual contribution obviously can influence the grade towards better or worse based on individuals. Yeah.
Great. Carsten, how does your work feature into the assessment?
Yeah, without sharing all the secrets, because some of the students might listening. No, I'm just kidding. It's more or less the same, like as Carina said. It's a bit of an individual and a group contribution. I mean, I'm in lucky situation that I have this real customer included into this design sprint. And at the end, the students have to give a presentation to the customer. So I have a second opinion as well. As an advisor, whether this has been, useful for the industry and so on. So it's a real life perspective on an academic course, which is really nice and fruitful for me as well. But at the end, it's the individual reflection and contribution to the course, which I have under control, because it's really like 1 week in a row, every day from early morning 9 a.m. till late evening. And I see all the students, and I kind of create a bit of nervosity at the beginning. So before the course starts, I tell them, you have to be there. If you're not there, you will fail. You have to be there because it's a sprint. You have to be part of it, and so on. So I put some pressure on them, I must admit. But other than Riccardo, I'm sorry, some students, you said some students loved it, some students hated it. I've never had a student complaining, to be honest. So at the end, they were like super happy, really exhausted, but super happy. So the whole course is a lot of fun for all of us. And that's maybe also a big part of, easy grading and assessment.
I agree. We shouldn't forget us in the whole equation, and having fun as much as the students do is also important. I have one last question to the panel before I'd like to hand over to Bill, who has some final words to share. We've been talking about how to be brave, and he might give us one idea of how to be brave and think about our own development. But my last question to the panel is actually, what inspires you? And where do you find inspiration, not only for what you've presented today, but also maybe other ways of teaching? Where do you get your inspiration from? Carsten, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Where do you get my inspiration from? I'm kind of open-minded. I'm listening, I'm seeing, I see where is a certain need. I mean, as I said, the whole program is about human-centeredness. So I asked myself, what can I do? What do I need to learn? What do I need to teach to the students? So I came up with this sprint methodology even before the book was published. I was stumbling through the internet, and I was like, I saw a very first interview with Jay Knapp, and he was telling about this amazing method. And I was like, what is this amazing method? Where can I find information about it? And there was just fragmented information. And I was, okay, I give it a try. I just tried to copy the idea. And I tried it in the very first year, 2013 or so. It was a mess, to be honest. Yeah. So it was a mess. And then when the book was published, I was like, oh yeah, this is how they meant it, So I followed, and then I adapted it. I changed it. So just be open for inspiration and ideas, and reflect to your own teaching whether this might be useful or not.
Great. So starting with a template somewhere. Carina, briefly, what inspires you?
Well, it depends, I guess, a lot on more the organizational stuff. My inspiration comes from conferences and events like this, where we also talk and build, therefore, absolutely valid question, how about the assessment of such a thing? So really trying to reach out to peers and fellows and co-teachers. But the inspiration of more on the how part actually comes more from practice, since I'm still also innovation practitioner in a company as an innovation manager. I actually see my colleagues doing the things totally different than I would do at university. And this is not new for you. for all of you, there shouldn't be a gap anymore. We shouldn't be standing there talking to the students, trying to explain how the world works. But it's more a co-workshop or having a workshop in the same way as we would do it naturally in a company. And I learned so much from the colleagues because they always ask themselves how to conduct certain workshops, of how to collaborate with other, let's say, departments and units. And there are tons of workshop tools that I'm now meanwhile applying at the university. And all of them come along with certain outcomes and certain skills and competencies where I'm saying, perfect. I don't need to read about a competence in a book. No, I want to apply it as we would do it at work. And then afterwards, hopefully in the reflection, I could link this back to a book. But anyhow, this how question and inspiration on how to do it and how to teach, I wouldn't even call it teaching anymore, comes from practice.
Fantastic. Riccardo, what inspires you?
I probably echo what Carina said, is the talking to people and his conference. And one thing that I share is that I think sometimes we underestimate the power of traditional conference. I applaud this event and this type of workshops, and I know that ISPIM, even if I'm not a regular attender, actually I'm not an attender normally, but I know there is a dedicated attention to teaching, but a lot of other conferences don't. And it is a shame because what we have all in common is not just the research, but we're all educators if we go to an academic conference. And for example, in our community, actually, I got lucky to be working with a couple of colleagues from the University of Greenwich and a couple from Watt University. In the past 2 or 3 editions of the Social Network Analysis Conference, we established a forum of workshop to discuss how to teach network analysis, every time with a bit of a different flavor. And I think it's a missed opportunity if we don't try to squeeze in this into the schedule of any event we organize, because that's something we all do, and it's the best way to share ideas.
Thank you so much. And I think to maybe add to this just very briefly, if I think about what inspires me, I would say actually sessions like the one today, hearing from all of you about your practice, reflecting how that might fit into my own context, how I could adapt the templates, tools, and methodologies that you're using. So thank you so much for your contributions today. Speaking of community and interaction, I think it's really important that we have this space, and also thank you for everyone that has come along to join us today. The final word I would like to hand over to Bill, who is also part of our special interest group, and Bill might offer another channel of engaging, exchanging, and educating ourselves about our practice. Over to you, Bill.
Well, firstly, what a great session as we go into September. We all come back, we're still remembering our holidays, and I hear from experts like all of you, and I go, right, okay, I've got to click back into gear. So thank you. Could not have been better. Particularly about future educators, which some of you may not know about so much. Future educators is absolutely about younger teachers, and I know it's great to see Rafaela and people I know, really experienced teachers. We've got to think about the next generations as well, the people who are coming out of their PhDs. Maybe they are the people who are co-teaching with those of us who are more experienced. And that's really what the Future Educators group is for. We've all been a bit busy, and we're looking to reignite that group for the next 12 months. And so rather than welcoming all of you to that group, I think sessions like this for more senior people are probably better. But what we do want to do is to welcome in the next generation to share reflections on how to teach, how to engage, how to build that confidence, how to think about how we change assessment, the nuts and bolts of becoming a world-class innovation teacher, which doesn't just happen. So if you'd like to come along, we'll be communicating about that. That's great. But particularly if you'd like to guide some of your younger colleagues towards the Future Educators Network, I think that's really what I wanted to share. So back to you, Katerina. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
I just put a link into the chat. Feel free to pass that on to colleagues that might be interested. And it's, for me, at least in the UK, 2:30, which means we're at the end of our event today. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. stay in touch and hopefully see you at our next event.